Hey guys, it is Johnny here, and I'm here with Layla.
Hey
And
guys.
welcome to another video. Please make sure you do like and subscribe. We do appreciate the following and any recommendations that you give out as well to people that you think may benefit from this kind of content. But we do appreciate all of your feedback, so thank you very much. How
Thank
you
you
going,
for the
Layla?
comment. Yeah, I'm doing really well. Thank you for all the comments, and please also click the bell for notifications for future videos if you do subscribe or when you do subscribe to the channel. But yes, Johnny, I'm well. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. So we're going to crack into some connections between the Merchant of Venice. We're going to look at that text as an example of some human experiences, and we're going to look at that in connection with our present situation today as we make this recording. And this is why we are virtual, is that we're experiencing in the world of the coronavirus, the COVID-19 pandemic. Let's see if we can make some connections for you between universal human experiences that you would have already explored, presumably, in The Merchant of Venice. And we'll have a look at what those universal features are as they pertain to our present circumstances. And we'll see if we can make any connections or distinctions between the two.
Yeah, so I think it's nice to sort of start off framing elements of our own context, which we feel invite comparative analysis to the world of William Shakespeare when The Merchant of Venice was composed. And I think one thing that we've noticed with the COVID-19 circumstance is because the coronavirus is an abstract and non-personifiable, I guess, disease against which we're all trying to fight, we have seen instances of attempting to personify COVID in a kind of racist sort of way. And I think this is played out in particular when we look at examples of Donald Trump blaming China for the disease, or individuals being kind of targeted because of or by virtue of their race. So we're seeing this sort of omnipresence of racism, which is permeating. And of course, William Shakespeare's own context was one which was deeply xenophobic towards the Jewish and towards Jewish individuals. And we know that our protagonist in the play, he is the merchant, he's a Jewish merchant himself. And we see his kind of bitter hatred and resentment towards him because of the racism to which he's been subject within his entire existence. So I think one point that we should start off with, maybe, Johnny, is considering how racist views promulgate throughout time. History often plays on racism and continues itself. And that's one point that can be seen as a human experience to be paralleled with the world of Shakespeare. So emotions which come out of this are a sense of vulnerability experienced by the individual, a sense of hate, and also a sense of fear, all of which are felt within our own world and can be thus compared to the world of Shakespeare.
Yes, that's right. And of course, the context back in Shakespeare's day was very different, in terms of why certain racist trends were actually perpetuated. But the point is that when you have classes of people who enjoy superiority of status, power, and wealth, people don't want to share that. It's a human thing and society has a way of kind of forming in such a way, I should say. Society forms in such a way that often pockets of people are excluded, and that there are incentives for society to remain that way for certain groups of people. And racism is just one manifestation of where power and wealth and status resides with one particular group of people. And then if they deem another group of people to threaten that in some way, or their sense of comfort or security in the kind of situation that society affords them, then they can retaliate with things that we deem to be racist, right? Hatred, and unfounded resentment, and very kind of hypocritical resentment as well over traits that we know all of us as humans embody. So I was just going to pick up on a paradox there that's really interesting, is that applies to our present circumstances, which is that we know that kind of we see aspects of greed and resentment and hypocrisy in The Merchant of Venice. And we see that a lot of characters embody those traits. There's actually a unification that everyone, even Shylock, right? And we have Antonio, and we have all these different characters. They all share very similar kind of like a sense of resentment and bitterness towards one another and jealousy. And we see all these different traits come out, and we say, okay, they're actually unified in that sense, right? That's a paradox that you will probably examine when you look at that. And in our present circumstance, it's interesting because the coronavirus, the virus itself, right, it does not discriminate between race. Funnily enough. So when you want to talk about racism, you can think about now how we actually have something that forces us. It should force us somehow. It still hasn't actually done this for the reasons we're saying. There's still always going to be a reason to blame another race, another group of people, even when the very source of fear, the very problem itself, doesn't discriminate whatsoever with race. We're seeing actually a very clear-cut example of a virus that could, infect someone who is Asian, someone who is Jewish, someone who's Caucasian, equally the same for all we know. So it doesn't discriminate on the basis of race, that's for sure. And funnily enough, we still see history repeating itself even from Shakespeare's day when he explored this, that people will find ways to try and blame others, to shift the blame, and to actually, in effect, alienate and exclude and be racist towards groups of people, such as people from China, by labeling things the Chinese virus and whatnot. You are exacerbating those issues. Even when the source of the problem itself is something that doesn't discriminate whatsoever. There's just, I'm not saying that one links directly to the other, but it's an interesting way of looking at it, in that even when something is divorced from race, race still becomes an issue, because we like to blame people. It's in our nature to blame. It's in our nature to try and make sure we come out on top as people, right? If we want our group to stay on top, it's easy to blame someone else. Then we don't have to take the blame. It's a human nature to not be accountable. It's actually the minority of people who can be fully accountable for everything that goes on, and that won't blame others. Most humans blame others for issues like the coronavirus or something very micro that's in a domestic sphere that's in your household. People like to blame, right? As my grandfather says, everyone's quick to point the gun. So, which I always found funny, right? He just puts his finger up like that, points it. As soon as someone blames someone else for something, he just goes, oh, because everyone wants to point the gun really quickly. It's his fault, right? Her fault. So it shows that aspect about human nature.
Yeah, I was going to say, because self-preservation is such an enduring value that comes up throughout all of these texts. And even, removing the racial element here, these emotions of resentment or hate or a sense of vulnerability within a given society are just broader elements of human experience, which I think relate to Shakespeare's a lot on what's happening right now. This sense of the individual resenting or hating other people who aren't following the rules to try and stop the spread of the virus. And in the same way that we see Shylock kind of experiencing a sense of resentment for being ostracized in his own world, those elements I think are comparable and can kind of point to the study of human experience as a study of values which remain at the core of human existence, irrespective of time or place.
That's right. That's right. So I think they're pretty key. Was there anything else you wanted to speak about specifically on the text?
No, I think what you want to take note of are elements of the individual versus the collective human experience, right? So the collective experiences of Jewish people in Shakespeare's time, the collective experiences of us trying to fight against the virus. Then you have certain anomalies which may arise in human experience, or the particular kind of individualized experience of Shylock and his hatred and resentment towards his own world, and how that kind of self-fulfills his further ostracization within the play itself. I think you can also point out the racist elements of both particular periods and how we can use that to leverage self-preservation. So what we're trying to, I guess, articulate here is that we can use elements of our own context to provide a lens through which you can access the enduring values of what Shakespeare presents in the play. And we've tried to give you a little bit of a recap of what some of those core ideas are.
Yeah, that's really good. I just thought of one additional point that might be useful for people watching this, and it's that idea of kind of happiness, right? And we know that, and fulfillment, because we know in the text a lot of characters are literally seen to say that they're not happy. We see it in the first line of the play, I think it is. I know not why I'm so unhappy, or something of the kind like that. I'm paraphrasing, but we see it throughout the play. We see many characters who are dissatisfied, and what's Shakespeare perhaps telling us there? Perhaps he's coming from a more enlightened, I think Shakespeare was quite enlightened, but a more enlightened point of view, where he's basically exposing the reality that everyone in that play seems to be discontent, right? Notwithstanding all those dynamics, he really did well to expose the superficiality of those differences, and the fact that those differences can really govern so much of what we do and how we treat others is ultimately going to be to our own detriment. Because at the end of the day, if you can't find solidarity and you can't become part of a unified collective and look at the positives with each other and look at the positives at each other versus looking at the negatives and how people are different, you can look for the similarities. Perhaps that is a remedy that Shakespeare is offering there to a discontentment that is otherwise inevitable when you're in these toxic mindsets. And society has a role to play there. Some of these things are unavoidable, unfortunately, that society makes you feel that way. But we all have a role to play in kind of transcending those superficial barriers between one another. And that can be, which can be exacerbated, unfortunately, through things like racism. But we all have a role to play in actually transcending it, rising above it, and understanding the paradoxically completely unified human experience that we all share together.
Yeah, that's right. And also recognizing that despite differences, race, social class, and so on, there are certain, as you say, wants of fulfillment or kind of concepts with which the individual wants to engage, that being love and acceptance and respect, that remain at the core of all individuals despite their differences, which is another kind of enduring value that I think Shakespeare raises within the play.